Tonight on Bridge City News, many of our province's mayors gathered in Lethbridge today. We will explain why. A flag raising ceremony was held in honor of Police Chief Rob Davis and his last day as head of police in our city. And the federal party leaders have powerful messages for Canadians as campaigning has officially begun.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Many mayors from across the province gathered in Lethbridge today. The municipal leaders are calling on the province to create meaningful partnerships with mid-sized cities.
We've come here to discuss issues that are of mutual interest. How we work together as a provincial government and our municipal leaders to make sure that we are all on the same page. I think at the end of the day that the mayors understand that we are in a period of financial difficulty. And as Minister of Municipal Affairs, I have been clear that we are to work together.
He's warned us that the budget will be coming down in mid-October, and then we'll see what that looks like, and we'll respond accordingly. I know that other cities are doing the same things that the city of Lethbridge is doing. We're already conducting reviews on the services that we provide. How can we be more efficient? How can we cut red tape at the city itself? How do we be part of the provincial plan and be effective partners with our government?
The group said priorities include more funding, opportunities for provincial revenue sharing, and a collaborative development to improve policing in Alberta. Today was Rob Davis's last day as the Lethbridge Chief of Police. Police headquarters held a flag-raising ceremony to send Davis off to his new role as the head of police force in Brantford, Ontario. Davis has been the police chief in Lethbridge since 2015. He says he'll look back fondly on his time here in southern Alberta.
I'm a low-key guy. My plan was to just ride off into the sunset, but Deputy Woods and RSM Davis and then Chief Abella and Tabor said you have to have something. So I'm emotional, overwhelmed. I'm not a fanfare type of person, so to see the turnout and very emotional. The community has to be part of the solution, and obviously they are in Lethbridge. They want to be part of the solution. And so policing's notorious for thinking we have all the answers. We don't. We have to accept the community's input, value the community input, and then when they want to be part of the solution, embrace it, run with it.
There is a process that's underway, and we will have further information to share with you at a special meeting of the Lethbridge Police Commission, which has been called for 2 p.m. Friday afternoon at City Hall.
Davis is the city's 17th chief in 117 years. A 17-year-old boy has been charged with possession of a weapon following an incident at Galt Gardens yesterday. Lethbridge police say they received a call about a male brandishing a handgun around 2:30 p.m. Upon arrival, the male took off on a bicycle. Police caught up with him a short time later and found a BB gun wrapped in a shirt that was located under a tree. The investigation determined that the boy was showing the gun to another in an effort to try and sell it to him. The youth, who cannot be identified, is charged with 1 count of possession of a weapon dangerous to the public and resisting a peace officer. He's currently in custody. Reconciliation has begun a week early with an event put on by the Heart of Our City and the Lethbridge Reconciliation Committee. A downtown community initiative was unveiled outside of the Galt Museum earlier today. The project celebrates the International Year of Indigenous Languages.
This is a project that we call Tactical Urbanism, but that is a small, low-cost project that is intended to improve the public realm. It's intended to be in a public space for people to come, take pictures, brighten an area up, and then also to start conversations. And that's why it was a really good project to partner with the Reconciliation Committee, because we want to start conversations on reconciliation in the community, and what better way to do that during the International Year of Indigenous Languages with Oki.
And I'd like to acknowledge the people that have done work previously to get this recognition. As we look at historically, we weren't allowed to leave the reservations until the early 60s. And so since that time, some of our people have gone forward to have had an impact on in the city.
Reconciliation Week will run from September 15th through the 20th in Lethbridge. The agriculture sector in and around our city includes more than 900 farms, generating more than $1.1 billion of revenue each and every year. Today, during the regular weekly SACPA session at the Royal Canadian Legion, Speaker Trevor Lewington presented the economic impact of agriculture on Lethbridge.
It's the single biggest sector of the local economy, so we want to talk a little bit about why agriculture is important, but also talk a little bit about the future of agriculture. So what's happening with technology, what does the farm of the future look like, and really paint a bit of a picture that it's good news. We've got lots of exciting opportunities to come up, but talk a little bit about what that looks like and what does it mean for our community. And there's always concerns, particularly right now in terms of international trade. So we have some great trade agreements with our partners in Europe, for example, but Brexit is certainly taking the lion's share of their attention. We've had some challenges with China of late in terms of accepting exports of canola from us. So, if you're a producer, you want to make sure that you can get your products out of the field. That's always a miracle when the weather cooperates. Then you've got to have a place to sell it. So being able to get to market becomes very, very important.
Lewington is the Chief Executive Officer for Economic Development Lethbridge, a team that develops and delivers on initiatives to promote the Lethbridge region as an excellent place to live, work, and invest in. Fred Fox, Terry Fox's brother, is on a 30-day cross-Canada journey. He was at Lakeview Elementary School in Lethbridge earlier today to kick off the 2019 Terry Fox Run and to say thanks to the community for supporting the run over the years.
Well, I don't know where time went. It's been 39 years. Time has gone by so fast, but it seems like it was only yesterday. And Terry could never have imagined with what he started in 1980. Through schools like Lakeview and communities like Lethbridge and Tabor, where I was earlier today, that they're keeping Terry's dream alive. Terry could never imagine that impact. I mean, he never got to the prairies. He never got beyond Northern Ontario. And today, his legacy is strong and as well it's ever been because of schools and communities across Canada.
Fox says he thinks Terry would be proud that 39 years later his mission still remains alive and that he still motivates and impacts people around the world. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is encouraging members of the UCP government to help defeat the Liberals in the upcoming federal election. Kenney says the Justin Trudeau government has brought in policies that have damaged our province's vital oil and gas industry and that a change in government is in the best interests of Alberta. The Premier adds he may help out some federal Tory candidates during some trips he'll be taking outside of Alberta to drum up investment. The federal Liberals currently hold only 3 seats in Alberta. The governing Saskatchewan has lost 2 members in the provincial legislature due to the federal election. Warren Steinley and Corey Toucher resigned their seats so they could run for the federal Conservatives. Toucher was chosen as the Conservative candidate in the riding of Saskatoon University in March, and Steinley is seeking election in Regina Leuven. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe wished both candidates all the best. Newly elected Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister says the next sitting of the legislature could begin next month. Pallister says he's negotiating with the opposition to bring the legislature back sooner rather than later. He says the PCs want to move on their priorities after winning a second straight majority in yesterday's election. Pallister says a throne speech is needed for procedural rules, and his government will then move on to passing the provincial budget. Our country's federal leaders took to the campaign trail delivering messages they hope will help them get elected on October 21st.
We've done a lot together these past 4 years, but the truth is, we're just getting started. So Canadians have an important choice to make. Will we go back to the failed policies of the past, or will we continue to move forward? That's the choice. It's that clear, and it's that important.
It is now clear, more than ever before, that Justin Trudeau thinks that there is one set of laws for him and his powerful friends and one set of laws for every other hard-working Canadians like you. So, Justin Trudeau must allow the RCMP to do its job, and he must immediately waive privilege and cabinet confidentiality. We're going to be outlining our vision for the country to put more money back in the pockets of Canadians and let them get ahead. But what today shows is that you just cannot trust Justin Trudeau. He will say anything to cover up his scandals, and he'll say anything to get reelected, and Canadians cannot believe the things that he says.
4 years ago, Justin Trudeau charmed us with pretty words and empty promises. He said the right things, but he didn't do them. Behind closed doors, Justin Trudeau does whatever the wealthy and powerful corporations want him to do. It's clear Justin Trudeau isn't who he pretended to be. And Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives are not the answer. They're going to cut taxes for the wealthy, but they're going to cut services that you and your families count on.
When it comes to healthcare in Canada, are we really getting the most bang for our buck? Bacchus Barua, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute, is studying that very question.
Ultimately, the only people who can answer that question are Canadians. But before they answer that question, they need that one important piece of information, which is how much are they actually spending on healthcare? And that's what we're trying to figure out today and help them understand that as an average family, you're probably spending about $13,000 for healthcare. It's up to you to figure out whether you're getting good value for your money.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Barua as we also discuss the pros and cons of privatized healthcare. That's coming up after business news. Tina Conkin is the director of the Relationship Lifeline. She also wrote a book called How God Used the Other Woman, Saving Your Marriage After Infidelity. I asked Tina recently why good people and good healthy relationships end up cheating.
When we come into marriage, we come in with all of us, the good, the bad, and the ugly, every part of us. And so as we bring things into our marriage, we don't know really what's going to trigger during our relationship. And so even though it seems normal, you seem to have the normal problems that most couples have, and so you keep putting it off as that, there are times where it just falls apart even when it's good.
Catch the full interview with Tina discussing how a marriage can be rebuilt after infidelity. That's coming up in the second half of our show. The Insurance Bureau of Canada says severe storms that struck the prairies between July 13th and July 30th caused more than $130 million in insured damage. Severe weather rolled across Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba in mid-July, bringing significant hail, winds, and more than 68 millimeters of rain. Nasty storms on July 30th damaged homes and cars throughout Alberta and Saskatchewan. The Bureau says more than $900 million in insured losses have been recorded so far this year. Authorities say divers off the Southern California coast have found the body of the last missing victim in a fatal boat fire that killed 34 people. An investigation continues into what caused the deadly blaze. Salvage efforts to recover the vessel resumed this week after several days of weather delays. Investigators are looking into how the batteries and electronics were stored and charged. They will also look into how the crew was trained and what the crew members were doing at the time of the fire. A storm carrying at least one tornado struck South Dakota's largest city overnight, leaving a trail of destroyed buildings and downed power lines.
Quite honestly, what happened with this system is we just had a human error issue. Only some of our sirens were activated. So when that call from the Weather Service came to Metro, only a partial number of our sirens were activated. So we met about this for about a half hour already today. We already have some plans in place to rectify that going forward. This was an extremely fast-moving system that in some cases, by the time even our dispatch center was noticed that they should be talking or should be giving the alert, the system was already moved on.
The Billy Graham response team is working alongside of Samaritan's Purse to help those who were hit hard by Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas. Now here's a special story of one young survivor who accepted Jesus as his Savior.
We're here at Freeport, Grand Island, Bahamas. And backing me is the Emergency Field Hospital, Samaritan Purse, where I'm on site as a rapid response team chaplain. I just had a great time speaking with a young man that was suffering through a crisis before the storm of losing his mother last year. And now the storm brings back the memories of her even more than ever before. But he received the love that we offered to him, that he's receiving the physical love and the love of Christ through the emotional and spiritual this afternoon. He's going away laughing and smiling, and it was just a blessing to see him change from a depressed position to an upright position of looking up towards the Lord.
It was on this day that the U.S. faces the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. JFK confronts critics of his religion, and singer Johnny Cash dies. This is Today in History for September the 12th.
September 12th, 2001. It's the day after the terrorist attacks on New York and Washington that killed thousands of Americans. In New York, stunned rescue workers search for bodies in the smoking rubble of the World Trade Center. And in Washington, President George W. Bush condemns the attacks, which also badly damaged the Pentagon, as acts of war.
Our country will, however, not be cowed by terrorists.
1943. During World War II, Nazi German paratroopers rescue Benito Mussolini, Italy's deposed dictator. They free him from a hotel in northern Italy where his own government was holding him prisoner. Mussolini rules a Nazi puppet state in the north until he's killed near the war's end in Europe 2 years later. 1960. John F. Kennedy faces critics who question whether being a Catholic should disqualify him for the White House. The Democratic presidential candidate tells a group of Protestant ministers in Houston,
I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president, who happens also to be a Catholic. I do not speak for my church on public matters, and the church does not speak for me.
Kennedy becomes America's first Catholic president when he narrowly defeats Richard Nixon that fall. 1953. Wedding bells for a future White House couple as Kennedy marries Jacqueline Bouvier in Newport, Rhode Island. 1977. In South Africa, black student leader Stephen Biko dies while in police custody. His death triggers a global outcry against South Africa's racist apartheid regime. And 2003.
Because you're mine, I walk the line.
In Nashville, singer Johnny Cash, the man in black, dies of complications from diabetes. The country music legend was 71. Today in history, September 12th. Ed Donahue, The Associated Press.
Tennis star Bianca Andreescu spoke to the Canadian media for the first time since winning the U.S. Open. She said focusing on the New York court was difficult, and she's prepared to work on her technique and improve her strength.
I could barely hear myself think out there, really. It wasn't easy blocking out the crowd, and I think that gave an edge to Serena. I mean, that's why she's a true champion of the sport. She's known to come back after being down in matches, so that was expected. And I think I prepared well before that because I spoke to my coach about it, and he said, if you're going to win this match, you're going to have to stay focused from the beginning of the match till the end, no matter what happens. I'm just really glad with how I managed those 2 games at the end.
Hopefully, Bianca will dominate for years to come. Another beautiful day across southwestern Alberta today. The nice weather will be sticking around. All of the weather details are coming up. Another beautiful day in Lethbridge with lots of sunshine, mainly clear tonight with a low near 8 degrees. A mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 21 tomorrow. A nice weekend is shaping up. Just a few clouds at 22 on Saturday, sunny and 24 degrees on Sunday. Monday, just a few degrees cooler at 21. Tuesday and Wednesday, the clouds return and the mercury will drop to 19 on both days. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 21 and an average low of 6. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1953 at 32 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -5 in 1949. Sunrise was at 7:02, sunset at 7:53. Let's have a look at tomorrow's national forecast now. Victoria will see some rain and a high of 19. Lots of showers and 18 degrees in Vancouver. Clearing at 20 degrees for Calgary tomorrow. Just a few clouds at 20 as well for Edmonton on Friday. Mainly sunny and 20 for Regina. Just a few clouds at 21 degrees for Saskatoon. Expect rain and a high of 15 for Winnipeg. A few showers and 22 degrees for Toronto tomorrow. Mainly sunny and 22 as well for Ottawa. Lots of sunshine and 21 for Montreal. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be mainly sunny and 17. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be mostly cloudy and 18. A chance of showers and 15 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 11 degrees on Friday. The latest economic forecast for Alberta from our province's government-owned bank looks gloomy. ATB Financial says it expects the economy to grow just under 1% this year. It says poor pipeline capacity and a sluggish oil and gas sector has dampened job creation, consumer spending, and construction activity. ATB says the number of unemployed is growing. The average unemployment rate over the first 7 months of this year was 6.9%. It also noted that Alberta's export sector is being hindered by Chinese restrictions on key agricultural products like canola. Saskatchewan is supporting Alberta's challenge of new federal legislation on how environmental assessments for pipelines are handled. Our province has asked the Alberta Court of Appeal to rule on whether Ottawa's Bill C-69 is constitutional. The UCP government says it infringes on the rights of the provinces to control their own resources. The Saskatchewan government says it will apply for intervener status in the case. Saskatchewan Justice Minister Don Morgan says it is imperative to stick up for the rights of the province to regulate industry. Up to 700 workers are being laid off temporarily in November at 3 Nutrien potash mines in Saskatchewan. Nutrien says the up to 8-week inventory shutdowns will be at its Allen, Lanigan, and Vaskoy potash mines. It says the production downturn is due to a slowdown in global potash markets. The Saskatoon-based fertilizer company says if all 3 facilities remain idle for 8 weeks, potash production could be reduced by around 700,000 tons. Manitoba Agriculture says harvest progress over the past week has been limited thanks to widespread rain. The harvest is about 40% complete, which is below the 3-year average of 56%. Weed quality loss is being reported where swaths remain in the fields. Drying of tough and wet grain is becoming more common throughout Manitoba. The province says a light frost occurred in 4 or 5 regions over the weekend. Hay and forage yields are below average. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Premier Jason Kenney is encouraging members of the UCP government to help defeat the Liberals in the upcoming federal election. Kenney says the Justin Trudeau government has brought in policies that have damaged our province's vital oil and gas industry, and that a change in government is in the best interests of Alberta. So how does a marriage survive an infidelity? Relationship expert Tina Conkin has some advice for us next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. LCI band students will be doing a car wash and bottle drive fundraiser on September 14th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Gas King on 16th Avenue North to help support the LCI band program. These dedicated students will vacuum, wash, and dry your vehicle with a smile. Cost is by donation. They will also be accepting empty bottles for their bottle drive. The 13th annual Rob Dixon Memorial Classic Car Show is taking place Saturday, September 14th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Logic Lumber Car Museum in Lethbridge. All registered vehicles are eligible for door prizes plus a raffle for an 8-by-12-foot shed built by Fox Buildings. Entries are $10 each with proceeds benefiting the Interfaith Food Bank. There will also be a 50-50 draw and silent auction open for all to take part. For more information, visit interfaithfoodbank.ca. It's the 39th annual Lethbridge Terry Fox Community Run taking place Sunday, September 15th at the Civic Center track featuring special guest Fred Fox. Registration begins at 11 a.m. with the run at noon. No entry fee is required. Participants are welcome to walk, run, rollerblade, and cycle. For more information, email lethbridgeterryfoxrun@gmail.com or register online at terryfox.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Marriage can be difficult at the best of times, and even more so if there's been some form of infidelity. Does this mean that the marriage is over, or is it possible to restore and rejuvenate the relationship? Joining me now to discuss this today is Tina Conkin, a conference speaker, director of Relationship Lifeline, and author of the book, How God Used the Other Woman, Saving Your Marriage After Infidelity. Tina, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's been a few years since I've been on Bridge, but it's good to be back.
How is it that people in good, happy relationships end up cheating?
Well, good happy has to be described. I believe that quite often, and this is my belief, when we come into marriage, we come in with all of us, the good, the bad, and the ugly, every part of us. And so as we bring things into our marriage, we don't know really what's going to trigger during our relationship. And so even though it seems normal, you seem to have the normal problems that most couples have, and so you keep putting it off as that, there are times where it just falls apart even when it's good.
Can you tell me what happened in your own marriage that led you to write this book?
Yes. So we were that typical good marriage. We were marriage counselors, as a matter of fact. We worked in the counseling field and we helped a lot of families. I was even a children's pastor. My husband was an associate pastor for a long time. And then we broke off into this area of helping the hurting and really helping relationships regain. So how regain momentum, regain love, regain fun. And here we were, in the middle of that, helping others, and we fell apart. And that's when we realized that unresolved baggage from your past comes back to haunt you, honestly does. And so we were in a time that we'd never experienced before. My husband was the fun, loving guy. There was never anything but a good day. Just because you were alive was a good day for him. But he went through a period when his mom was diagnosed with cancer that he didn't know how to deal with that. He'd never really dealt with deep pain. I came from more of a dysfunctional home, and I'd had a lot of moving in my childhood, some bullying. Not him. He was like, the best case scenario was his deal. So the first real pain that he experienced was experiencing his mom's death and not being able to engage in it. So I saw him withdraw. I saw him not be himself. And that's when I discovered I didn't know how to be there for him. I didn't know what to do except telling him, you don't have a choice. You need to just go to the hospital and see her. You can't just hide. And I was more the obligation person because that's how I grew up. You don't do what you do what you have to do. And so that's sort of when we started going downhill. And how does a good marriage get in trouble? You ask your close friend to help you out. And you say, listen, you know what it's like to have lost parents. Can you help him? Can you talk to him? And during a painful time, they connected emotionally.
So how long did it take to restore your marriage? Now, this isn't something that happens overnight, does it?
No, it's not. And from the time I forgave, which was pretty quick, just because I'd experienced the value of forgiveness for myself, I knew that wasn't going to be a choice for me, even if I didn't know the outcome of the marriage. And so from the time forgiveness happened, it took us 2 years to make it better than it ever was before.
So how do you actually go about forgiving this kind of thing? Is it an ongoing process?
It's yes and no. The forgiveness part was a decision I made because I realized that even if the marriage didn't work out, I didn't want to carry that with me. And so forgiveness was really something I did for myself. I had to see that neither one of them, and for my benefit, I was able to see through the eyes of compassion. I was able to say, neither my friend nor my husband meant evil against me. This happened. And I think for most people that have been betrayed, if you could just focus on that first, did they really mean to hurt you, or did maybe boundaries get crossed? The Bible says flee, and you didn't. When temptation hits, you're supposed to flee. You're not supposed to walk away. You're supposed to run away. You're supposed to go with all your might. And there's a reason for that. And to my husband's credit, he was really passionate about explaining that after the affair. He said, listen, even if a feeling feels good, you're already in the flee zone. Get out, So if somebody gives you a compliment and that feels good, get out of there, because the enemy will build on that. And so that was very powerful for us to learn, that it felt like they weren't doing anything wrong, but feelings. And that's where a lot of, these Facebook affairs happened. And it happens pretty innocently quite often.
Now, Tina, it's one thing to forgive someone, but it's another matter entirely to develop trust in your spouse again. How do you go about doing that?
Oh, that question. Okay, so that haunted me, because at the very beginning of our healing, that was the question my family had. That was the question that best friends had, and people that loved us. How will you trust him again? Okay, so you want to reconcile, you've forgiven him. Great. How will you trust? And that plagued me, and it was haunting. And I'll be really honest, I never trusted again. I don't believe in trust, and I'll tell you why. Because I believe that for me, what happened was a miracle. I remember it was about 2-3 weeks where this question of trust was very haunting. And I went to church. And at that time, I was going to Victory Christian Center here in Surrey. We lived in Vancouver with John and Helen Burns. And I attended a service by myself. I sat in the very back row. I didn't want to see anybody. We were 2 weeks out, so the pain was real. My husband wouldn't even go to church because of the shame. So I went by myself, and I remember Pastor John stopping in the middle of his message and going, I don't know who this is for, it has nothing to do with my message, but here's what I've got to say to you. God never told you to trust people. He said, trust God and love people. And I walked out of there without even listening to the rest of the message. And I said, thank you, Jesus. That was a message that came straight from heaven. My responsibility is for us to let love conquer at this point. But my responsibility is to trust you, God, with my heart. I can't trust another human with my heart or my life. That is God's prerogative, and I was able to do that. I was able to say, no matter what happens, no matter what evil is set against us, he will turn it to good. And so I had to really make that conscious decision and to this day, I live that way, even with friendships, and I've said to friends, if I came to you and said, I've been hurt in friendships before, so, I really need to trust you that you're not going to hurt me. That's putting such an expectation on you to do right by me. And that's just not fair. So in our marriage, we really decided to start developing safety and building boundaries around our marriage and healing from our past, because so many things we had dragged into our marriage from the past, I dragged in that I couldn't be there and be nurturing, because I'd been hurt by showing nurture. And I didn't ever want to be hurt like that again. And I talk about that in my book. I talk about some of the vows we make as children. And then we bring it into our marriage. I promised myself I would never get hurt again by a man, right? And that was how I protected myself in my marriage. I just wouldn't get too close.
Is it possible for a relationship to be stronger after infidelity? I think about when I broke my arm once, and then my doctor says, once the bone heals itself, it'll be even stronger than it was originally. So is it possible to be stronger?
It is so possible. It was for us, because we had to really look at ourselves. And one of the things that I've been criticized for is taking responsibility, because one of the big things I ask myself in the book is I say I've had this mirror moment, with God, where God says, stop being a victim and ask yourself what part you've played in that, and what part you've played in this. And so people are taking that to mean that I took responsibility for his affair or her affair. I did not. And I wouldn't want anybody listening or seeing this show to think that anybody should take responsibility for another person's sin or wrongdoing. But I took responsibility for what led up to that, because that was our marriage. We were one. What was going wrong in me that wasn't able to be there for my husband when he needed me? And I had to really look at that. And so, yes, I didn't know that about bones can be stronger. But that's great. I'm going to use that because I didn't know that. But yes, our marriage was much stronger. You know why? Because we filled the holes. We filled the fear. Our marriage was no longer built on fear of it being destroyed or on fear of being hurt. It was built on trusting God and loving each other.
So what are the first things a spouse should do after finding out that there's been an affair? Are there maybe good and bad ways to respond?
Well, we have been running personal intensives for marriages for the last 25 years, and our program is called Relationship Lifeline. And people can get help there. They can read the book, of course, and there's lots in there. And I give a lot of tips in the book of how to get through the first 24 hours, how to get through the next week. But the first thing is, if you're a believer, trust God that He does not mean this for destruction, and He can take this and make it better than it was before. And we've developed a program called the R3 Factor, and we really take you through a process of healing. The first being the R1 is really to reveal. You can't change or heal what you don't reveal in yourself. I had to see what was broken in me first, and what was broken in me went back many years before I got married, and I brought that into my marriage. And then the R2 is really, you can't change what happened in the past, but you can rewrite the story. You can rewrite the story that's written on your heart. You were not created to be a failure. You were not created to feel shame. You were created to be in the love zone. That's what we were created. So I teach about living above the line where there's love, and under the line is fear. And quite often we live in fear. And so it's looking at being able to rewrite those things that were meant to destroy us. And then the third, of course, is the most fun part, and that is the renew. And that's what we did. When we renewed our marriage, it was better than it ever was before. I didn't know two people could be that intimate emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally, in every way. And when I lost my husband 5 years ago, I lost half of me. I lost the man that completed me really here on earth. But because I, again, go back to trusting God, I am complete in Christ.
So how do you protect your children when you're going through the process of restoring a marriage, Tina?
Well, that is something that I really want to speak to very strongly, because at the end of the day, when God said to me, don't you be a victim, it's because as an adult, we are not victims. Children are. And a lot of the things that I work with couples is make sure that when you're having, we used to call it my crazy time, that you at least care for your children. And there are many crazy times during that 2-year period. And what I would say is be guarded for your kids. So don't try to not fight. Don't try to not expose. Don't try to not be in that reveal process. But somehow, with every fiber in you, think about them. They're the innocent ones. They're the ones that, so set times. Maybe they're in school, right? Maybe you take fight nights and take it out of the house. Maybe you take those times where you set, because, if you think that you can just get over it, you can't. Get help. But in all of that, maybe it's about taking the kids to the grandparents for a weekend when you need to just get it off your chest. We had to do that. We had to take times where I could just release a lot of the emotions that were inside me. A lot of nights were spent crying after the children were in bed, but we built rules of engagement in our home. And those are so important. And that's why I say get help, because there's a lot more involved to you healing than just you. And you're the adult. You don't have to stay a victim. The children now are victims, and they don't know what's going on. And they shouldn't have to know every detail either.
You offer couples retreats for those struggling in their relationships. What do they actually look like, and do they actually work?
They do work. And, we work with some of the biggest churches in Southern California and Canada. And right now, we still, after 25 years, have a 90% success rate of couples getting back together that are separated or in crisis mode. So when that reveal process happens, I can't even explain to you how much healing happens. And why are we different than most couples conferences or couples, people say it sounds too good to be true, so it can't be true. It's so true that we're willing to give you your money back if it doesn't work for you personally to heal. Not all marriages make it, but they will all personally, as a person, learn how to heal. And they will heal because it's your heart that needs to heal, and we don't deal with the marriage as much as we deal with your personal heart. Jesus said in Matthew 19:8 that divorce was allowed because of the hardness of the heart. So why do I have such credibility and faith in what we do? Is because we take what Jesus said, it wasn't so in the beginning. So if the hardness of the heart is not meant to be there, and that's what causes divorce, then let's look where the hardness of the heart came from. And let's put our faith that in Christ, if we trust him, he'll soften our hearts because we give our heart to him, not to a spouse or a friend, right? We give our hearts to him, and in that way we can heal.
Amen. Tina Conkin, author of How God Used the Other Woman, Saving Your Marriage After Infidelity. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Vancouver, BC.
Thank you for having me on.
Canada is known around the world as a country that provides free health care to its citizens, but is it actually free? Of course, someone in fact is paying to build hospitals, buy equipment, medicine, and to pay medical professionals. That person is Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer. My guest now is Bacchus Barua, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute in Vancouver, BC. Welcome back to BCN, Bacchus.
Thank you so much for having me on the show again. It's lovely to see you again.
You too. Healthcare is the costliest part of many governments' budgets, but do Canadians understand how much each of us is putting towards healthcare costs?
You know, it's a remarkably difficult thing to do. We don't really have a dedicated health insurance tax. We don't really experience fees when we go to hospitals, and it's contributed to this myth that we have a free healthcare system, or at least that's how other people in other countries refer to it. I think most Canadians know that we do pay something for our healthcare system. The question, of course, is how much.
Yeah, how much is the average family paying in taxes for the healthcare system? And by healthcare, what would that actually include? Would it be dentists and pharmaceutical costs?
So what we did in this study is we looked at the cost of the public healthcare system. So this is everything that Canadians contribute for basic core medical healthcare services. So it doesn't really include costs for things like dentists or pharmaceuticals that are got outside the system. But when we take all of it together, we find that the average family is actually contributing about $13,300. So sorry, $13,300 for the average family of four. The average unattached individual, single person, is paying about $4,500 for the public healthcare system. We can talk about whether this is a really high number or a really low number, but it's certainly in stark contrast to the notion of free healthcare.
Yeah, how does it really compare to other countries around the world, including the United States and countries in Europe?
Well, it's very difficult to do an apples-to-apples comparison when we're looking at the cost for our public healthcare system for each one of these families. The best that we can do is actually look at the total cost of our healthcare system. And we routinely do that by looking at Canada compared to other countries with universal healthcare. And yes, there are at least 27 other countries with universal healthcare. And when we look at Canada in that cohort, we actually usually stack up amongst the top spenders. We're spending upwards of 11% of our GDP and ranking between 4 and 11 out of 28. Depending on which measure we look at. Again, very different from the notion of free healthcare system, and actually one of the most expensive healthcare systems amongst universal healthcare countries.
You know, what's interesting too is that my wife had to have some surgery, some heart surgery recently, and we looked at in Canada here, it was all covered, of course. We're very blessed and very thankful for that. But that same surgery in the United States would have been $120,000 without insurance. So it really is an eye-opener for a lot of Canadians, when we realized how blessed we really are.
Well, I'm sure if that same surgery in the United States was covered by private insurance or Medicare or something like that, again, people wouldn't be paying it out of pocket. So it's really a question of insurance coverage. But that's why I think the conversation of, about us centering it between Canada and the United States really leads to a lot of misleading conclusions. Canada really should be compared with other countries with universal healthcare. So countries like Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, Australia, France, they all have universal healthcare. They're spending about the same as we are in that cohort, but they actually routinely have more doctors, they have more beds, they have far shorter wait times than we do, and they have roughly the same, if not better, outcomes. So once we start to get that comparison into question and we realize that, okay, we can have universal coverage, it doesn't really require a public monopoly over it. We can also do it through private providers. And then we tweak the question to, how do we actually just get the best healthcare system that delivers timely access to care, regardless of ability to pay, but without really necessitating it to be either government or private. It's really about what delivers the best care to Canadians. But again, even before we get into those conversations, a fundamental part of that equation is how much are we actually putting into that system? And I think a lot of Canadians would be quite surprised to know that they're actually contributing $13,000 towards their healthcare system this year. And then when you take that cost, it becomes a question of, okay, well, are you actually getting good value for your money?
So how did you actually come up with the number of $13,000? Because, I mean, in Canada, we don't actually have the direct dedicated health taxes.
Yeah, it's actually remarkably difficult to do that. And that's one of the reasons why Canadians also have a tough time with it. We do have two good statistics that we can look at. We can look at the overall cost of our public healthcare system. So that's about $160 billion. And we do have a general idea about how much the tax burden is for different families. So, for example, for a single individual and for a family of four. And once we combine those two numbers, we get a general rough estimate of how much these families are contributing through the tax system. And it's important to put a caveat over here and remind viewers that we're paying for the healthcare system not just through our income taxes or through healthcare premium. We're paying for it through a multitude of different taxes that we see as sales taxes or employment taxes and a variety of different things. It all goes into general government revenues, which makes it very difficult to try and figure out. But our best estimates are that the average family of four is spending about $13,000 for healthcare, and of course, it does vary by income. At the bottom 10% of income earners are probably contributing about $500 a year, whereas the top 10% of income earners are actually contributing upwards of almost $40,000 a year.
So, Bacchus, can you give some perspective on how much healthcare costs have really increased in Canada?
Yeah, we're very fortunate to be able to calculate these figures all the way back to about 1997. And what we see is that when we take all the families combined, healthcare spending has actually grown about 3 times as fast as the cost of, for example, food. It's grown about twice as fast as expenses for clothing and shelter. And importantly, it's grown faster than incomes. So if we just take total healthcare spending, it's grown by about 184% for the average family. Whereas their incomes have only grown by about 106%. So, there's that clear imbalance over here. Was telling you a little bit about the sustainability of these increases over time.
So how does the current tax for healthcare compare to what it was like, let's say, 20 years ago?
Well, the interesting thing is that if we look at just the last couple of years, we've seen a bit of a slowdown in the increases of healthcare spending for the average family. But this has come on top of dramatic increases in spending throughout most of the 2000s. So again, when we contrast it for healthcare for the average family, it grew by 180% since 1997, but incomes only grew by about 100% since 1997. So even though it's slowed down a little bit over the last couple of years, that's on top of skyrocketing increases throughout most of the 2000s.
So what kind of an impact is this really having on Canadian families? Are people saying, you know what, we're going to have to do with less food to pay for a lot of our health care?
Well, I think this is something that a lot of governments are starting to struggle with. You can't have infinitely increasing expenditures on healthcare without something else having to give way. Either governments are going to have to increase taxation, or you're going to reach limits on how much you can spend on other social programs. What we're seeing right now is that governments have basically started to slow down their increases of healthcare spending. So it's still increasing, but at a slower rate. And of course, we see the result of that, which is rationing of services. At the same time as these increases have taken place, so have there been increases in the average wait for treatment. For example, the average wait for treatment was about 19.8 weeks the last time we did the survey last year. And I don't remember the number in 1997, but in 1993, when we started that survey, the wait was only 9.3 weeks. So, large increases in wait time over the last 2 or 3 decades. At the same time, we're actually seeing increases in spending. So there's a mismatch somewhere between what we're putting into the system and what we're getting in return.
So the bottom line back is, why are healthcare costs rising at a much faster rate than practically everything else in our country?
I think that's a really good question for Canadians to ask themselves, for policymakers to actually to ask as well. The question really is that the increases in spending is one part of the equation, and they could be fine. It's fine to have increases if you're getting commensurate value in return. If you're starting to see decreases in wait times, if you're starting to see huge increases in the number of physicians or MRI scanners, but we're not seeing that. We're seeing an imbalance where on the one hand we're increasing our spending, but on the other hand we're also seeing longer wait times for care. And the simple answer to that is we really haven't seen any shifts in policy. This is an old approach of throwing money into at a problem and hoping it goes away, and that just doesn't really seem to work.
What's really interesting is the fact that a lot less Canadians are smoking today, which you would think would have a lot less of a burden on our healthcare system. So maybe costs should be coming down instead of going up.
That's something that we haven't really looked at in terms of actual population health and what that does to healthcare costs. That's what one should expect and would hope would happen. But this is really a question of, we have a system where the incentives are such that there is no tempering of demand. We have no cost sharing, and so you have essentially infinite demand for services. You have limitations in the supply of services because there is only a single payer, essentially government, or there are many payers in terms of us being taxpayers. But that leads to an imbalance between supply and demand, and that's why we see the rationing that we do in terms of things like long wait times.
It seems that in Canada, as soon as we use the term private, is used in healthcare discussions, governments panic and they're worried about losing votes. Any thoughts on how that could possibly change?
I think we're increasingly aware of how universal healthcare is done in other countries. I think Canadians have a better understanding of the fact that universal healthcare doesn't necessarily mean government healthcare. We can see successful countries like Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, all having universal healthcare systems where they embrace the private sector, where they have co-payments and cost sharing, and the results are clear. While they're spending about the same as we do, they have more physicians, more beds, shorter wait times. I think we're going to be a lot more open to having these conversations in the future.
What do you say to those people that say, though, you're creating a two-tiered healthcare system?
Well, we already have a multi-tiered healthcare system. And in particular, we have a system where if you're rich enough, you can escape our healthcare system's problems by going to a different country. That's really not how you want to design healthcare. Essentially, I would hope that people design a healthcare system where rather than the preservation of the system, we put patients first and say, look, it doesn't matter whether it's public or private or if they're co-payments. We want to ensure that patients are getting adequate treatment in a timely manner. And of course, when we talk about things like co-payments, all these countries have exemptions for vulnerable populations. It's an understanding that these are important signals to send, while still understanding that we want to make sure that nobody has a huge cost burden for healthcare. There are other ways to do it. Other countries have figured it out, and we should look at what they're doing.
So Bacchus, what can we learn from provinces that have already experimented to some degree with private healthcare? Has it been successful?
There's one province that actually has thought outside the box and had a fair amount of success with private healthcare, and that's Saskatchewan. In the late 2000s, Saskatchewan had some of the longest wait times for healthcare in Canada. They started something called the Saskatchewan Surgical Initiative, which, amongst other things, actually contracted services out to private clinics. They also started a pool referral system, and the outcome was very clear. By about 2014 or 15, they actually had the shortest wait times in the country. Now, of course, there are limits on what Saskatchewan could do within the confines of the Canada Health Act, but it provides us a very simple example of how we could improve healthcare in our country within the confines of the Canada Health Act.
Have there been any real issues, any difficulties when it comes to private healthcare so far in our country?
There's nothing really that we've seen. Most of these other countries introduce private healthcare in a regulated market. They understand that it's a partner that needs to ensure that it's delivering services to patients regardless of ability to pay. And as far as we've seen, there really aren't significant issues with delivering treatment across the income spectrum in countries like Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands.
Are Canadians getting good value for the amount of taxes spent on healthcare? What are your thoughts?
Well, let me answer that in two ways. In the pure statistical way, we see very clearly that we are one of the highest spenders, but we have very few medical resources and we have some of the longest wait times. So in that sense, we're not getting good value for money. But ultimately, the only people who can answer that question are Canadians. But before they answer that question, they need that one important piece of information, which is how much are they actually spending on healthcare? And that's what we're trying to figure out today and help them understand that as an average family, you're probably spending about $13,000 for healthcare. It's up to you to figure out whether you're getting good value for your money.
Is there anything changing on the Canadian landscape in relation to healthcare? Is there an appetite for allowing maybe more private healthcare into the mix?
Well, I think the newer generation is far more open to the concept of private healthcare, especially as not really seeing it antithetical to universal healthcare. We're seeing court cases fought in BC with Dr. Brian Day's clinic, who's fighting for patients' right to get treated in a timely fashion when the public system fails. We also have a generation where we're used to having timely services delivered across the spectrum, and I'm sure that same attitude is going to come to healthcare. And of course, it's important to remember that does not have to stand against the concept of universality. There are other countries who figured it out, who are using the private sector to deliver the universal healthcare promise.
Bacchus Brewer, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Vancouver, British Columbia.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.